Today is the second day of the IT Architecture Regional Conference, the premier event happening here in New York. And we had a fascinating talk this morning by Jeff Scott, who is a senior analyst at Forrester's. We have got Jeff here for a 5 minute chat, and he's going to tell us a bit about architecture as a profession. Jeff, first question. The word architecture comes from, I understand, architecton, master builder. How do you see the generic definition of architecture, and does it work for enterprise architecture, or do you need to tailor it for enterprise architecture?
I think that as we move forward, we're going to be tailoring it more and more. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, when we all started off as fundamentally IT technical architects, I think that master builder view fit very well. We were building out the infrastructure, we were tying together technologies, we were bringing all kinds of different assets together to create the whole. But as we move forward and move into the business view of the world, I think that our role is going to shift from master builder to master strategist. Mm-hmm. And we're going to need a new set of skills and a new set of tools to do that.
We hear a lot about enterprise architecture practice, and in fact, earlier this year, I happened to be involved in a City of London institution where they just said, okay, let's create enterprise architecture practice in our organization. And they had a bunch of architects who were specialists in individual fields, and they had to be kind of made generalist and understand each other. We had data architect, we had integration architect, we had a number of business gurus. I don't know whether or not to call them business architect. That would be another question for you again. And we kind of got together and saw how should the organization exist over a certain period of time. Is that a fair enough definition of an enterprise architecture practice? Who should and shouldn't be in that?
I think that's a pretty good definition. I think the first thing I would say about that mm-hmm. is every architecture practice is different. And that means that the architects inside that practice are different. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they affect each other. Mm-hmm. So when we go out and look at the hundreds of architecture practices that we see three fundamental things shaping them. Mm-hmm. The least most important factor of that is the timeline. How long have they been together? So you certainly see architecture practices evolve from being very technologically focused to being more process focused, more modeling focused, more business focused, and over time that shifts. The second thing you see, though, is that architects bring a viewpoint, mm-hmm. and a information-oriented architect will bring that viewpoint to the practice and shape the practice around information. A transactional based architect will come to the architecture and create much more of a transactional integration focus. A business architect will do the same. So the architects themselves shape it. The third factor there is the business context. The business has a certain set of needs from architecture, and honestly, they also have a certain set of things they will allow architecture to be. So, and even sometimes those two things don't line up. But when we look at the environmental context, we look at what the architects bring to the table, and then we look at the timeline as they have evolved over time, you can start to see that, wow, every practice is somewhat different. As we look at more and more architecture practices, what we are seeing, though, I think, which is to your point, is we're beginning to see them now to segregate out. Mm-hmm. 10 years ago, you would have an enterprise architecture practice, and it was all enterprise architects. Everybody was a generalist, and they strove to be generalists. So if they were an information person, they strove to expand. If I'm a Unix person, I strive to understand information. Now what we're seeing more and more of is an enterprise architecture practice that's fundamentally divided into the four domains mm-hmm. of infrastructure, information, application, and business.
So does the business drive everything else, you would say?
Drive everything else, meaning?
Information, application, and infrastructure.
I would like to say that today business drives architecture, but I don't think that's true. Mm-hmm. I think we are still in a model where the architects mm-hmm. are driving what architecture is and what it delivers. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think that's a big factor of why so many architecture teams struggle mm-hmm. and many actually fail, because mm-hmm. they're not connected to the higher level strategies. And in fact, a very recent piece of research that I did, we got a result that 26% of the architects believe one of their challenges to add value is the organization doesn't line up to their goals. Mm-hmm. Well, that's backwards. They got to align to the organizational goals.
Very true. In one of the books I co-authored, Zachman happened to forward it, and he wrote quite a bit about why people do was the operative word, enterprise architecture. So they say, okay, we need enterprise architecture, let's do a 2-month, 2-year, whatever program for enterprise architecture and get something out of that, and maybe may not be after that, not continue. Now, doing enterprise architecture as opposed to being enterprise architecture, where enterprise architecture is an indispensable part of an organization for eternity. What's your take on that?
I definitely think that the architecture group is a practice. It's an ongoing practice that will evolve over time, again, based on what the company needs. I think that the short-term project-focused architecture things can only accomplish a very small amount. Mm-hmm. The goal for architects is really to look into the spaces that the rest of the organization doesn't look at. So what we're trying to do is look across organizations mm-hmm. and look at the spaces between the silos, look across technology domains and look at the intersections of their domains and then map those two things together. Mm-hmm. Nobody else in the organization is doing that work. And as we move forward, the gaps in those spaces organizationally continue to grow. I think the gaps on the technology side are shrinking. And that's part of what's going to motivate us more to the strategist, the business architect role. Mm-hmm. But I definitely believe it's an ongoing internal practice that adds value in almost all cases. I'll say there are some companies that might not need that.
In the past, we used to have a situation where architecture was considered as something where there are too many unknowns. So for example, if we have things such as we have a defense project going on which is full of novelty, and where the failure could be extremely disastrous, then we need something like architecture, or we need something other than business as usual. That was understood, and I believe architecture was born out of that. But then, my question to you as an industry observer is, has it really spread across the rest of the industry? Should something happen for it to spread? And how do you see architecture as a profession moving next 10 years?
I don't use the should word. And in fact, I've been writing about this lately. I think architecture will do what it can do. And I think architects will do what they can do. So from my model, the real question is, can architects create value in the organization's context? It's not about creating the value that I as an architect think is valuable. It is, can I create value that the business leaders of the organization grasp? And if I can do that, then we're going to spread and continue to grow, and the profession will flourish. If we can't do that, then it's going to recede. And I really think at the end of the day, it's up to us to figure out, what's going to happen to us, and we're in charge of that. And the challenge for each of us as architects is we're going to have to grow as individuals, and we're going to have to be comfortable doing things that might not fit our own architectural models, because that's what adds value to the business.